It was supposed to be the perfect weekend getaway. 4 friends, Mia, Jake, Olivia, and Sam, had planned a camping trip deep in the Pine Hollow forest, a secluded spot untouched by modern civilization. The forest was known for its towering trees, misty trails, and the eerie silence that blanketed it at night. Legends of disappearances and whispered warnings from locals only added to its allure. The group arrived just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and red. They joked about the haunted forest rumors as they set up their tents near a glistening lake. The air was crisp, and the only sound was the gentle rustling of leaves. Sam, the skeptic, laughed. "People just love to make up ghost stories. We'll be fine." But even as they laughed, Mia couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. A strange sense of unease crept over her, though she couldn't pinpoint why. As they lit the campfire, a chilling breeze swept through the clearing, extinguishing the flame almost immediately. Jake joked, "Looks like the forest doesn't want us here." They all laughed nervously, but the laughter faded quickly into the growing darkness. Somewhere in the distance, an unidentifiable sound, half whistle, half wail, echoed through the trees, sending shivers down their spines. The campfire was relit, though the earlier breeze had left the group quieter than before. As the night deepened, they sat in a circle, telling ghost stories to lighten the mood. Sam, ever the skeptic, smirked at every eerie tale, but Olivia kept glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone or something to step out of the shadows. Around midnight, Mia excused herself to grab her phone from her tent. A few moments later, she screamed. The others rushed to find her standing frozen just outside the tent, flashlight trembling in her hand. Someone was standing right there, she stammered, pointing toward the tree line. Jake scanned the area with his flashlight, but saw nothing. "Probably your imagination," he reassured her, but her pale face suggested otherwise. They decided to brush it off and return to the fire. However, the uneasy silence was broken by a soft rustling from the woods. "It's just the wind," Sam said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. The rustling grew louder, as if something or someone was moving closer. Jake stood, holding a sturdy branch as a makeshift weapon. "Who's there?" he called out into the darkness. No reply. Suddenly, Olivia gasped. "Guys, look!" She pointed at the lake. Ripples spread across its surface, though there was no wind. The moonlight reflected off the water, but something darker, something unnatural, moved just beneath the surface. "A fish?" Jake suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. Then came the sound. A low, guttural hum, like a deep growl mixed with static, echoed through the clearing. It wasn't coming from the lake. It was coming from the woods. "Okay, this isn't funny," Sam said, standing up. But before anyone could respond, their campfire flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. Panicking, Mia scrambled for her flashlight and shone it toward the trees. For a split second they saw it, a tall, shadowy figure with glowing eyes staring back at them from between the trees. It didn't move. It didn't blink. Jake grabbed Mia's arm. "We're leaving, now." But as they gathered their things, the sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, began circling them, though no one was visible. "We're not alone," Olivia whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her own heartbeat. The footsteps grew louder, crunching twigs and leaves as they circled the group. Jake held his makeshift weapon tightly, his knuckles white. Mia clung to Olivia, her breathing shallow. Sam, despite his earlier bravado, had gone completely silent, his eyes darting between the trees. "Stay close," Jake whispered, his voice trembling. "We move together." They gathered their gear in haste, their hands fumbling in the dark. The moonlight barely illuminated their surroundings, casting long shadows that seemed to shift unnaturally. As they prepared to head back toward the trail, Mia gasped, pointing at the tents. The shadowy figure was back. This time it was standing still, its glowing eyes fixed on them. The figure seemed taller than before, its outline faintly distorted.
this world. Jake took a step forward, raising the branch defensively. Who are you?
They started down the narrow trail, flashlights illuminating the dirt path ahead. But the deeper they went, the more unfamiliar the trail became. "Are we lost?" Mia asked, her voice quivering. "No," Jake replied, though the uncertainty in his tone betrayed him. The forest seemed alive now. Branches creaked overhead and distant whispers echoed through the trees. At one point, Olivia froze, gripping Jake's arm. "Did you hear that?" They all stopped, holding their breath. A faint sound like a child's laughter drifted through the air. It was soft, almost playful, but it carried an unnatural echo that made their skin crawl. "That's not possible," Sam muttered, his voice barely audible. They pressed on, their pace quickening. But no matter how far they walked, the trail seemed endless, looping back on itself. The landmarks they passed, an old, rotting log, a large boulder, kept reappearing, as if the forest itself was trapping them. Mia began to cry softly. "We're going in circles, we're never getting out." "Don't say that," Jake snapped, though his own fear was evident. "Just keep moving." Then they saw it. Up ahead, in the middle of the trail, was one of their backpacks, the same one Mia had been carrying. But it was impossible. Mia had her backpack on her shoulder. "Leave it," Jake said, pulling the group past it. But as they passed, Olivia glanced back and screamed. The backpack had moved. It was now several feet closer to them, though none of them had touched it. "Run!" Jake shouted, and they all bolted down the trail. The whispers turned into full-blown voices now, calling their names, laughing, crying. The forest seemed to close in around them, branches reaching out like grasping hands. Mia tripped, falling hard to the ground. As Jake and Olivia helped her up, Sam froze, staring into the woods. "Guys," he whispered, "look." They followed his gaze and saw dozens of glowing eyes staring back at them. The figures were everywhere now, surrounding them, their shapes shifting and blending into the shadows. A piercing scream echoed through the forest, not from any of them but from something deeper within. It was inhuman, guttural, and filled with rage. "We have to move," Jake yelled, dragging Mia to her feet. They ran blindly, the glowing eyes following them, the footsteps growing faster and heavier. The forest seemed endless, a labyrinth designed to keep them trapped forever. Finally, they stumbled into a small clearing. The moonlight shone brighter here, illuminating a strange wooden structure in the center. It looked like an altar covered in strange symbols carved deep into the wood. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the whispers ceased, replaced by an oppressive silence. "What is this place?" Olivia asked, trembling. Sam stepped closer to the altar, drawn to it despite the overwhelming sense of dread. "I think," he began, but his words trailed off as a low growl rumbled behind them. They turned slowly to see the largest figure yet emerging from the shadows, its eyes burning brighter than the rest. It opened its mouth, revealing rows of jagged teeth, and let out an ear-shattering roar. This time, there was no running. They were surrounded, and the figures began to close in, their glowing eyes flickering like dying embers. The forest itself seemed to come alive, as if the trees and shadows were conspiring against them. And then, everything went dark. The darkness felt alive. It pressed against their skin, suffocating and cold. The only sound was their panicked breathing, broken by the occasional distant growl. When the world finally came back into focus, the clearing was gone. They were standing in a dense part of the forest they didn't recognize. "Where are we?" Mia whispered, clutching Jake's arm. No one answered. The altar had vanished, and so had the path they'd been running on. Around them, the trees seemed taller and closer, their gnarled branches twisting into grotesque shapes. It was as if the forest had shifted, trapping them even deeper within. "We can't keep running," Sam said, his voice hoarse. "It's like the forest wants us to stay lost. And what's your plan? Wait for whatever those things are to come back and finish us off?" Jake shot back, his fear turning into anger. Olivia stepped between them. "Stop it. This isn't helping. We need to think." Mia knelt, picking up a jagged piece of wood. "We have to fight. If they're going to come for us, we can't just wait to die." Jake nodded reluctantly, gripping his branch tighter. "Okay, but first we need to find a way out. There has to be a trail somewhere." As they started moving, Olivia noticed something carved into the bark of a nearby tree. Strange symbols, similar to those they'd seen on the altar. She reached out to touch them, but Sam grabbed her hand. "Don't," he said sharply. "What if it's some kind of trap?" She hesitated but nodded. "Whatever it is, it's connected to all of this." They pressed on, the forest growing eerily quiet. The glowing eyes were gone, but the oppressive feeling of being watched remained. Every so often they'd hear faint whispers, just out of reach, or catch glimpses of movement in the corner of their vision. Suddenly, the ground beneath them gave way. They tumbled into a hidden pit, landing hard on damp earth. Groaning, they stood and shone their flashlights around. The pit was part of a larger underground chamber, its walls lined with more of the strange carvings. Bones, animal and human, were scattered across the floor. "This isn't just a forest," Mia said, her voice trembling. "It's a hunting ground." Sam picked up a bone, inspecting its jagged edges. These weren't animals. Something did this to them. Before anyone could respond, a loud screech echoed through the chamber. They turned to see one of the shadowy figures descending into the pit, its movements unnaturally fluid. It crouched low, its glowing eyes locked on them. "Get ready," Jake shouted, stepping in front of the group. The figure lunged and chaos erupted. Jake swung his branch, connecting with the creature, but it barely flinched. Mia and Olivia screamed, backing away as Sam threw a rock, trying to distract it. The creature moved with inhuman speed, dodging their attacks and slashing at Jake with elongated claws. Blood sprayed as he cried out in pain, collapsing to his knees. "No," Mia screamed, stabbing at the creature with her wooden spear. This time it recoiled, a guttural growl escaping its throat. The wood had splintered, leaving a sharp edge coated in some kind of black ichor. "It's hurt," Olivia yelled. "We can hurt it." With renewed determination, they attacked together. Mia struck again, aiming for its glowing eyes, while Sam and Olivia used rocks and sticks to pummel it. The creature thrashed and snarled, its movements becoming erratic. Finally, with one last scream, it dissolved into shadow, leaving behind only the black ichor on the ground. Jake groaned, clutching his injured side. "Is it gone?" "For now," Sam said, panting. "But there are more, and they'll know what we did." They helped Jake to his feet, but before they could plan their next move, the whispers returned, louder and more menacing. The air grew colder and the ground beneath them began to tremble. "We have to keep moving," Mia said, her voice steady despite her fear. "We hurt one of them. Maybe we can survive this." But as they climbed out of the pit, a chilling realization struck Olivia. The symbols on the walls weren't just random carvings, they were warnings, and now they had angered whatever ruled the forest. Above them, the trees shifted, revealing more of the glowing-eyed figures, their numbers multiplying. The largest of them stepped forward, its eyes burning like twin suns. It let out a deafening roar, and the forest seemed to come alive again, closing in on them. This wasn't a hunt anymore. It was a reckoning. The figures descended upon them, their glowing eyes burning with rage. The air was thick with the sound of snapping branches and guttural growls. Jake, barely standing from his injuries, gripped his branch tightly, determined to protect his friends. "This can't be the end," Mia whispered, tears streaming down her face. Sam looked at the symbols etched into the trees and ground around them, a desperate thought forming in his mind. "The altar," he said suddenly. "It's the key. We have to destroy it." "But we don't even know where it is," Olivia cried, panic setting in. "It moved us once," Sam argued, his voice firm. "Maybe it'll draw us back." As the figures closed in, Sam grabbed a jagged rock and sliced his palm, letting his blood drip onto the nearest carved symbol. The ground rumbled, and the forest seemed to shift again. The altar reappeared in the clearing ahead, pulsating with a dark, unnatural energy. "This is it," Sam shouted. "We end it here." With no time to think, they charged toward the altar, dodging the creatures that lunged at them. Mia grabbed a large branch and swung at the base of the altar, shattering part of the carvings. A deafening scream erupted, shaking the ground beneath their feet. One by one, the glowing eyes began to fade, the creatures dissolving into shadow. The oppressive weight of the forest lifted as the altar crumbled into ash. The group collapsed, gasping for air. The forest, once alive with malice, now stood silent. The whispers were gone. The glowing eyes were no more. "Is it over?" Olivia asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I think so," Sam said, his voice trembling. As dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight pierced through the trees, guiding them out of the forest. They didn't look back, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that they had survived something beyond comprehension. But as they reached the edge of the woods, Mia stopped, turning to glance back one last time. Deep within the shadows, a faint pair of glowing eyes flickered, watching them leave. It was supposed to be an escape from the chaos of the city, a weekend of peace under the stars. Jake, Emily, and their mutual friend Ryan had chosen Black Hollow Forest for their camping trip, a remote location known for its untouched beauty and eerie silence. As the group drove along the narrow dirt road leading into the forest, a subtle tension hung in the air. The GPS signal had disappeared miles ago, and the sun was beginning to set behind the dense canopy of trees. Emily, seated in the back seat, broke the silence. "This place is unsettling. Are you sure this is the right spot?" Jake, the group's self-proclaimed outdoorsman, chuckled. "Relax, Em. It's perfect. No distractions, just nature." But even Jake couldn't shake the strange feeling gnawing at the back of his mind. The group finally arrived at the clearing, a wide open space surrounded by towering pines. The air was still, too still. Not a single bird sang, and the usual rustling of leaves was absent. Ryan commented on the eerie quiet, but they brushed it off, blaming their overactive imaginations. As they set up their tents, Emily noticed something peculiar carved into a nearby tree, a strange symbol, a spiral interwoven with jagged lines. "Hey guys, look at this," she called out. Ryan and Jake examined the carving, dismissing it as the work of some bored camper. But Emily wasn't convinced. "It doesn't feel right," she muttered under her breath. Night fell quickly, blanketing the forest in darkness. The group sat around a small campfire, sharing stories and laughing, but the strange silence of the woods persisted. At one point, Ryan swore he saw a shadow move just beyond the fire's glow. He laughed it off, trying not to alarm the others, but his eyes kept darting toward the trees. Before heading to bed, Emily noticed something chilling, another spiral symbol carved into a tree near her tent. Only this one wasn't there when they arrived. A cold shiver ran down her spine, but she said nothing, convincing herself it was just her mind playing tricks. Little did they know, this was only the beginning. The forest was watching, waiting. Something ancient and malevolent had already marked them. The first night in Black Hollow Forest passed with an uneasy quiet. Jake, Emily, and Ryan tried to sleep, but the oppressive silence outside their tents made it almost impossible. Every creak of the trees, every faint rustle in the bushes felt amplified. Emily lay wide awake, staring at the thin fabric of her tent. She thought she heard faint whispers, but when she strained to listen, the sound vanished, leaving only the suffocating stillness. Morning came with a thin mist hanging low over the campsite. As Jake emerged from his tent, he noticed something odd. Their fire pit, which they'd doused thoroughly the night before, appeared to have been tampered with. The ashes were scattered, and the stones encircling it had been rearranged into the same spiral pattern they'd seen carved into the trees. "Did one of you do this as a joke?" he asked, his voice tinged with irritation. Ryan shook his head, rubbing his eyes. "What are you talking about?" Emily stepped out of her tent, pale and quiet. "I didn't sleep," she admitted.
I kept hearing things. She described the faint whispers, but Jake dismissed it as nerves. It's probably just the wind or animals, he said, though his own unease was growing. The group decided to explore the forest, hoping daylight would ease their nerves. But as they ventured deeper into the woods, the unsettling atmosphere only thickened. They found more of the spiral carvings, etched into trees at random intervals, some fresh, others weathered with age. The realization hit Emily first. These carvings, they're leading somewhere, she whispered. The trail led them to a clearing where the remains of an old, dilapidated cabin stood. The air was heavier here, charged with something they couldn't explain. On the cabin's door, the spiral symbol was carved deeply, almost angrily. "No way we're going in there," Ryan said, backing away. Just then, a soft sound broke the silence. A child's laughter, faint and fleeting, echoing through the trees. Emily froze. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jake nodded, his face pale. The laughter came.
The campsite was a wreck, their tents shredded and supplies scattered. The spiral symbol etched into the dirt felt almost alive, radiating an oppressive energy that made their skin crawl. Jake, Emily, and Ryan stood frozen, their breaths shallow. "We need to leave," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Jake nodded. "Grab what you can. We're getting out of here now." But as they hastily gathered their belongings, they realized their most vital item, the map, was missing. "It was right here," Ryan exclaimed, frantically searching. Panic began to set in as they realized they were now stranded in the middle of the forest with no clear way back. The sun was sinking fast, and the shadows stretched long and menacing. The group decided to head in what they thought was the direction of the dirt road. As they moved, the forest seemed to shift around them. Trails they'd taken earlier now disappeared, and trees loomed closer, as though herding them deeper into its grasp. Emily suddenly stopped in her tracks. "Guys, do you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely audible. It was the whispers again, but this time they were louder and clearer. The voices overlapped, speaking in a language none of them could understand. Panic bubbled up as the whispers grew louder, circling them like a predator stalking prey. Then they saw it, a figure standing just beyond the tree line. It was tall and impossibly thin, its face obscured in shadow. The group froze, their eyes locked on the figure as it tilted its head unnaturally, as though studying them. Emily felt her legs buckle, and she grabbed Jake's arm for support. What is that?" she stammered. The figure stepped forward, and as it moved, more symbols began to appear on the trees around them, glowing faintly in the dim light. A guttural, inhuman screech tore through the air, and the figure vanished, leaving the group paralyzed with fear. "Run!" Jake yelled, snapping them out of their daze. They bolted through the forest, their breaths ragged, the whispers and screeches following them like a relentless predator. Emily tripped, her hand landing on something cold and hard, a human skull, its surface etched with the spiral. She screamed, scrambling to her feet as Ryan yanked her up. They stumbled into another clearing, but it was no safe haven. In the center stood a stone altar, ancient and covered in the same carvings they'd seen everywhere. Surrounding the altar were more of the tall, shadowy figures, their heads all tilted at the same unnatural angle. Jake stepped back, his voice trembling. This isn't real. It can't be." But as the figures turned their faceless heads toward them in unison, they realized the forest had no intention of letting them. The clearing was suffocatingly silent, broken only by the sound of their frantic breathing. The shadowy figures stood motionless around the altar, their faceless heads tilted unnaturally. Emily clung to Ryan, her entire body trembling, while Jake scanned the scene, desperately searching for an escape, but the trees pressed in like walls and the air felt too thick to breathe. Then, as if in response to some unheard signal,